Welcome to Enlightened Conversations podcast, brought to you by YWCA Hanover. I'm your host, Lisa Smith, and I am so pleased that you have chosen to listen and learn with us as we explore a wide range of topics related to the YWCA's mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and bring peace, justice, freedom, and dignity to all people. I had the pleasure of witnessing a participatory presentation by Gloria Marcott during the October 23 Hanover Emerge workshop. Her presence in the room was electric and energizing, moving more than 200 women over a brief presentation to own their own strength and power. Gloria is the energy and brains behind Soul Punch Power Academy. Soul Punch provides women with safety and resilience training focused on empowerment, safety, self-defense, and trauma recovery. Her goal is to train 1 million women so that they can, in turn, train 5 million more, and so forth, until women all around the world own their own strength and power and are no longer subject to trauma or fear. I chatted with Gloria recently as she is looking ahead to another trip to YW Hanover. Let's listen in. How did you start Soul Punch Power Academy, and what's your basic mission with this?
Yeah, such a great question. And thank you for asking. So I have the ability to share. So, it started over 20 years ago when I had my initial safety defeat. I was abducted at 12 and survived. And that's where I learned that, things on the planet sometimes go sideways. Yes. And so the protector in me and the protector of myself started way back then. And from there, just kind of grew exponentially as I experienced things walking through life. I had, since that time had walked through, I will just say, different circumstances that also led to other things from a safety level that I really needed to take a proactive approach to my own personal safety. And I have always felt since that time inclined to teach that to others, always. And so from a very young age is when it started, but when it really amplified, was when I was in a corporate America setting and I was just in a work environment and went through something that was very traumatic to me, being a young, fit, I thought empowered person, empowered young woman. But that was the difference, was thinking I was empowered and would react some way as opposed to knowing, because I'd never really concentrated on my own personal safety. I concentrated on everything else. I concentrated on my job. I concentrated on when I was going through college. I concentrated on softball and, every day practicing and making it to, the Olympic level status, being invited to the first ever Olympic tryouts in softball. So everything that I concentrated on and that I practiced on, I was very good at. But when I needed it, I didn't practice on my own personal safety. When I needed it, it didn't exist. I didn't have any resources to pull from. So it started way back then. And as I progressed in life, I went into law enforcement. And in law enforcement, I literally trained myself through all of the most significant things that you could do physically from a safety perspective. One, because that was my job and it was required so that I would be safe and others would be safe. But I also did it so that in the evenings and the weekends, I could train young women and girls to be the best that they could be safer. And so it really started from there, from just what happened with me personally, and then just extending it to being able to make sure that, anyone that I could reach, really yelling it from the mountains, anyone that I could, talk to, teach, train, that would never have to walk through anything I ever did. That was my goal and my purpose at the time. And so in law enforcement, I did all the high liability things, and I worked my way up to becoming a master instructor in firearms, defensive tactics, officer survival, you name it. I was the one that taught everybody, the women and the men. And that is where I learned how to definitively know how to take care of myself by knowing the skills to break down the body. And in the evenings and the weekends, I would spend my time training women and young girls. So that's kind of the base of where it started. However, probably around COVID time and us going into the online world and me getting my physical classes taken away, I was like, oh my gosh, evil doesn't stop. Like
Right.
women and young girls still need to know. And physical, self-defense is not just an outside physical skill. That is the hill I will die on, because when you talk about self-defense, everyone's like, oh, karate, jujitsu, you teach this,
Right.
you teach that. And I'm like, yeah, that is a piece of what I do. It's the outside physical thing. But the other thing that I do is the internal pieces that I wish I would have had walking through the other traumas that I did that I just didn't have the skills for. We're talking emotional, mental, financial. Those are all safety parameters that we also don't initially get taught in school. And so it really is an inside out approach to safety. It started so long ago, but when COVID hit, I had to figure out another way to keep reaching women and young girls. So I took my physical program and put it online so people could go and study the physical skills, but I also started teaching the internal mechanics online as well. My business grew about 800%. And so then as that journey started and it really started taking hold across the country, that is when the 1 million women movement started, because we were reaching a time where things were shifting for women from a safety perspective on a really global platform. And I needed to serve more and on a larger scale. And so I implemented the 1 million women trained movement. And then the whole vision is that I will train 1 million women on the planet that's going to turn around and train 5 million other women and young girls. So it starts changing the safety equation for all of us, because you need those numbers. You need the mass numbers to effectively get to change. And
Right.
so that has been the journey, and it's going amazing. But that's kind of, the non-Cliff Notes version of how it started.
Right. Right. One thing that you mentioned that really kind of caught me by surprise there, Gloria, you said that, you were working well within your career. You were working on the softball prior to going into corporate America. You did that well. You did, but the safety part, it wasn't. Do you think there was a feeling perhaps of on your part, perhaps of assuming that you may have been safe?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I thought my size and strength and abilities alone would solve the problem. I
Mhm.
thought that I'm just gonna throw it out there. I thought I was a little badass because I was
Mhm.
fit, I was young, I was strong,
I got this.
yeah, I got this.
Yeah.
Like my mind was right. In all, for all intents and purposes, my mind was right. But what I was lacking was the skill,
Mhm.
right? And so, we can't let our mind dictate the skill part of that equation.
Yeah.
You have to have the skill behind you. A great mindset is important, but you also need the skill to back it up when things go sideways. And that's
Right.
what I didn't have. And so what happened in that corporate setting was that I ended up going to shutdown. I was young, I was fit. I thought I would be fine because my physicality alone would save me, and it didn't. I know why now. And that is what I teach. And that is why self-defense is not just an outside physical skill equation. It actually is an internal equation. And so when women come to train with me, sometimes they come for the outside thing first, right? Maybe because of something they're worried about or something that they've walked through and they just never want to experience it, or they never want to experience it again or experience it at all. So we take care of the outside physical thing. But then some women come to me for the internal things, for the things that are not seen but are still experienced, that are a safety defeat regardless. That's the emotional, mental, financial. And so women find me each way, and I blend the two, right? So
Mhm.
I'll either take them on the physical aspect, and then we'll go to the inside stuff, or we'll start with the inside and then we'll go to the outside, whatever that looks like for whatever part you are at on your journey on this planet.
You kind of meet them where they are.
I meet
Yeah.
them where they are. And the reality is, we have to be proactive about our approach to safety, and safety has so many different levels to it. and it's not just the outside physical skill. And so that is what Soul Punch does. That's why it's called Soul Punch, you know. So it really does get to the core and the soul of things from a all around perspective.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Oh.
How many women do you feel that you have an account where you are in that goal?
Gosh, that's a great question. So I actually am upgrading my branding and my website as we speak. And so maybe I'll put a counter on there of some sorts. But, you know, when COVID hit, I was probably just in the physical realm of training women, I had probably trained over 10,000 women on my own. What I will tell you is since that time, because of the strong partnerships and collaborations that we've had, in particular with the YWCA in Hanover and the other YWCA locations, it has led to other opportunities like being on the Chick to Chick podcast, and they have a subscriber reach of 350 million. So, you know, to quantify it, I've reached many because of the online environment that have been able to learn through hearing, seeing, and doing the online stuff. But I've also in the physical realm, just because of the strong growth and all the partnerships. I mean, it's up there. Well, like we're getting there. I really should put a counter on the website.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be
Yeah.
great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be good. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between the size and strength type of safety versus
Sure.
the technique and empowerment. Because
Yeah.
I remember from the mini session that you did over a lunch
Mhm.
conversation at Emerge, you had really kind of honed in on the fact that it was more technique and belief, empowering yourself to
Right.
believe what you have, versus being powerful physically.
Right. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. So, you know, definitively you have to know how to break down the body. You know, I always say your proximity to others should be relative to your level of skill if somebody decides to lose their ever-loving mind. And
Hmm.
so if you are not fully versed and fully defined in what you know your safety skill is, you've got to create time, distance, space, and a stopping action. And so, you know, there's so many variables that go into that, but the bottom line is that it's not just about how big the bad person is. It is whether you actually know definitively how to break down the body so that you can get away safely. And so as women, and as for the women that I teach, that is my primary market, I train women that don't want to go to a martial arts studio dojo every Thursday and roll around on the ground with guys just to simply go safely from point A to point B.
Hmm.
That's what they want, the problem solved. How do I get safely from point A to point B? And so you have to get to a definitive knowing that I teach how to layer your levels of safety, but from a body mechanic, to answer your question specifically, you have to know how to break down the body. And it is not just about size. If you know how body mechanics work and you know how to break down the body, it doesn't matter how big they are. You just need to employ that skill. But it is a skill, just like everything else, just like driving a car or all those things that we learn and do, and we train and we progress. You know, they didn't just throw you the keys to the car and you started driving. You actually had to take many micro implementations. And so that is how I train in the class. Is we start very small, we give the information, we succeed, and then we ramp it up, and then we succeed, and then we ramp it up. And so we get to that knowing, because you have to get to the knowing. You can't just think everything's going to be okay, and you also can't just think nothing bad is going to happen, and you just can't think that it doesn't exist. You
Hmm.
have to go in knowing that the possibility exists, and I just have to be prepared. And so how do I get prepared? I take a proactive approach to knowing how to definitively break down the body so that it doesn't take the overt strength. Makes
Right.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That
Yeah.
makes sense. And when you have that knowledge,
Mhm.
that then helps someone kind of supersede the fear that it
Totally,
will.
totally. It
Yeah.
totally initiates your command presence, because in the interim, like if you don't have the skill behind it, you're walking in the unknown and you're unsure. And that's displayed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a part of layering the levels of safety is your command presence. Like I walk through the layering, the levels of safety, your voice, your boundaries, your command presence. And the command presence alone can change a scenario. You know, it takes 7 seconds for somebody to pick you if you're going to be the one that they pick to attack. And this
Oh,
has been an FBI study way back in the day to the most violent offenders across the United States. 7 seconds is what it takes. And the reason that they pick you is because they think that they're going to win. And so you have to command your presence in a way that, one, doesn't shy away and absolutely lets them know you better pick someone else because I'm
yeah,
going to be your biggest ever loving nightmare if you choose me.
yeah. You're not
That's
going to
your
win
command
with me.
presence. Now, how do you get there? You employ the skill. You get the knowledge on knowing that you'll know how to solve that problem, right? You're going to give the opportunity with layering your levels of safety, whether it's your voice, your boundaries, meaning the distance to others, your command presence, how you present yourself, all of those things. But when they start violating all of those layers of safety, well, then now you know you need to act. So,
Hmm.
that layering emboldens you to walk differently as a woman walking the planet. So you're no longer walking with your head down, being afraid, averting everything. You're actually standing up tall. You're recognizing the world around you. You're making eye contact, not in a confrontive, combative way, but just in a way that lets you know, like, I'm not the one, not today, not any day, not ever,
Hmm.
right? And so that command presence is just different. And that command presence alone can save a scenario, period.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you can really change your personal aura
Yes.
to not send out that vibe that says, yeah, easy pickings here. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that
Yeah.
is a part of it. And it takes dedication to getting there, just like anything
Hmm.
else. You've got
Yeah.
to be prepared. We don't live in a world where we can't be prepared anymore. Unfortunately, I wish it was that way, but it's just not.
It's just
But it
not.
also it also doesn't have to be gloom and doom. And I think you probably experienced that at Emerge. Like there was no gloom and doom. There was just empowerment.
Oh no, there was.
Yeah.
It was powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It really was. So, now I notice I know you've got an event coming up soon with the YW, and you've been back
Yes.
a couple of times to do
Mhm.
various events. And the one coming up at the YW, I think if I remember right, is fairly young. I don't have the notes in front of me right now, but it's maybe like teenagers and into
Yes, so
yeah.
so all of the events that we're doing as far as the actual, 2-hour self-defense and safety class is really 10 years and up. I've taught
10
10
years.
years.
Okay.
Yeah, I've taught 10 years to 75 years. I've also just done senior 50 plus classes. I've also just
Hmm.
done mother daughter classes. So there's so many variations. And, that is the great thing about really being so partnered with the YWCA because we're just in such an alignment as far as our vision and our missions are concerned. And
Yes.
so we have a lot, we're actually exploring that now, different opportunities and things that we'll be bringing and sending information out. So, if anybody's not on the YWCA Hanover email list, they should get on there because we'll be sending information out on a lot of other things that we're exploring just to make sure that we're helping as much as we can and serving as much as we can, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so much more to follow. And October again is going to be another strong opportunity for training coming up. But again, ages 10 and up is typically what we look for. But 10 to 65 is what we do.
Is that's the general the fact of starting around age 10 just fascinated me because I mean it was a long time ago when I was 10, but I do recall around that time
Mhm,
starting that's when I really started to kind of shrink back
mhm,
and really started to think, oh, I don't think so. I mean, prior to that, you were just a kind of a badass little kid.
right.
You ran around and you did your thing and it was around that time frame just prior to puberty that you
Mhm,
or I at least, and I think a lot of other young girls too,
mhm,
started to shrink back into themselves a little bit and
yeah.
started to question how the world was receiving them and where did they fit in. And it just seems like the perfect time. How are
Absolutely.
you finding these young girls receiving this?
Um, well, they have to get to comfortability first. That's why mother-daughter classes are really impactful, because there's a level of comfortability there, and bonding that happens. And that is honestly why we do all women classes by women for women, because there
Oh,
is a
yeah.
level of bonding that happens that just doesn't exist in the other environment. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just there, it's just entirely different.
Right.
Give me an empowered woman that walks the planet the way I do, that intimately knows what I deal with. That's who I want to be empowered
Yeah.
by.
The energy is different.
Totally
Yeah.
understand. But when you're talking about young girls, it's so important for them to know that they can use their voice and don't have to be timid or shy or afraid. I can only put it into perspective where my daughter is concerned, right? She's been going with me to classes since she was 4 years old, and I just take her with me. And I used to put her in the corner and put her around all the pads, and she would hang out, but she would hear what I was teaching. I'll give you an example. I literally just have a real life example that happened yesterday. If you don't mind, I'll share it with you.
No,
So,
that's great.
she goes to other friends' houses and goes to do other things like go swimming or whatever. And, for me, for the things that I've walked through as a parent, and knowing what I walked through as a young girl and the things that happen, like I'm so conscious of doing absolutely everything I can to make sure she's going to be safe whenever she is not with me, or her other parent, right? And she was getting ready to go to an event today, and so I sat and talked with her last night, and I felt like I needed to make sure to share that, she could use her voice there, whatever she needed, and just kind of guide her on the things that she should be doing and to pay attention for if she was uncomfortable, and what she should do and how she should contact me, and how to be. And she looks at me and she's like, Mama, I've been raised with soul punch, right? I was like, oh my God. I mean, if that wasn't the most touching, heartfelt moment, like,
Oh.
you always wonder if you're doing enough and if they take
Mm-hmm.
it in. And I'm telling you that they do, but just it has to exist, and you have to have the conversations, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing or a scary thing. It just has to be there from the most authentic, heartfelt ways. And she hears it and she's
Yeah,
like, you, I got this. And I
I
was like,
got it.
oh my
Yep.
God.
I've been hearing you. Yep. I, I've been absorbing it, Mama.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's
that's
exactly what she
great.
told me. And so, I think it just goes to say that I think it's imperative that we start young. I wish I would have had that opportunity, and I will absolutely always make sure that she does, so that she doesn't experience the same things I did. Do you know?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I don't think we do that with young girls
Yeah.
unless we consciously do that. I
Right.
think, I think way too often, um, when they get to the age of your daughter or around that 10, 11, 12 years old, we
Mhm.
start to even unconsciously try to mold them into what will be successful in whatever little realm they're in, not necessarily what will be the best for them. And
Absolutely.
even if we don't intend to do that molding, I think we unconsciously do it, and we really need to, open our eyes and stop ourselves from doing that
Yeah.
and help them develop their own strength and and empowerment so that they can become who they need to be.
Yes, because then they advocate for one another. And, that is why we do the mother-daughter classes. That is why we do programs within the schools, because it's so important, whether it's during their gym hours and go in for a week, which is an amazing program that we do, or whether it's an after-school program and they spend an hour with us during the week after school and learning those skills. It's important for us to be able to show them, because they will take it in and they will be empowered by it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's very important to us that exists as well.
Yeah, that part of your 1 million women, or maybe a chunk of girls.
Oh, it
And
absolutely
yeah,
is. It
and that's
absolutely
great.
is. I can't tell you how many classes I've had, Several summers ago, I think I trained 400 women in Albuquerque alone, just every Saturday, every Saturday, every Saturday. And the moms that brought the daughters with, it was just life-changing. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I noticed something on your website. You talk about emotional cycling. Can
Mhm.
you give me a little bit of a background on that, how that fits
Yeah,
in?
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So that's a part of the internal self-defense that I teach. It's the Breakdown to Breakthrough program that I have. It's 90 days. And that is a part of the reason why I'm rebranding the website, because a lot of people don't know it exists. It came by the way of when COVID happened and us going online. But, most people are just like, oh, you just do the self-defense, but I also do this other thing. And it's really amazing because what happens is when we experience traumas, we sometimes run into emotional cycling as a result of force science, threat science, and neuroscience things that happen within our body. I know this now. I didn't know it back then when I was walking through it, which is why I'm an advocate for it. But sometimes what happens when we start feeling some sort of way, which is feeling in a threat way. We can perceive threat in many different ways. Like if something has happened to you in your past and it is perceived as a threat, and I'm not just talking physical in nature, it could be something that you experienced, that you heard, that, you know what I'm saying? Some sort of trauma that you experienced that you take on as a threat. Well, your body senses whatever that threat is. It could be something you hear, see, smell, taste, all
Mhm.
of those things that can bring on that kind of threat within your body. And if you don't have a way to navigate that threat, what happens is, I'm just for the radio listeners, I'm pointing to my lower neck, which is your lower brainstem. If you don't have the capacity with emotional intelligence or emotional regulation to stop the emergence of those feelings that really explode once they hit your lower brainstem, if you don't find a way to slow it down, then it goes up to your top brain like an 8,000 mile per hour gas pedal. And once it gets to your top brain, in your top brain, you're supposed to try and pull from your cortex, your library of things that you know how to solve that cycling, that problem. But what
Okay.
happens is it activates your amygdala that sits behind your thyroid and kind of goes up to your top brain. Do you remember those pencils way back in the day that had the hair on the top of them, that little guy
Oh,
that
yeah, and you
spun around
twirl it. Yeah.
and like that? Well, that's kind of what your amygdala does when you're trying to actually pull from your cortex and your library of information of all the things you know and have studied of how to regulate. It goes up there and it kind of spins it so that you can't. And what happens is you act out of proportion possibly with what's happening. And it
Mhm.
eats you from a mental, emotional, physical level. It could look like depression. It could look like extreme anger, lashing out. It presents itself in many different ways. So the bottom line is within my program, I teach, in essence, how to redirect and how to kind of tourniquet off that emotional spike so that you can work through and problem solve what you're being presented with so that you can see it clearly. Sometimes we don't see things clearly. We take that on as a threat. Our body is already responding, and then bad things happen.
Right. We have that reaction and we're
Right.
not sure why. Yeah.
Correct. And this is not just an outside physical, this is not just a threat to an outside physical attack. It could be a conversation you hear that is a conversation that really traumatized you in the past. Boom, you're there. It could be being in a place that really traumatized you in the past. Boom, you're there. It could be seeing something that your brain takes on as a threat, and boom, you're there. So the bottom line is we have to get to emotional regulation and emotional intelligence. So the big piece of what I do is teaching that threat science of what happens to your body, because once you understand what's happening, then you have the ability and the tools to tourniquet it off so that it doesn't spike up at 8,000 miles per hour and go to your top brain and then dump in all these negative hormones that completely take you out. So I teach in the program, like there's 4 unstuck things that you could do to really kind of help once you start feeling some sort of way. Because once it starts burbling up, that's when you want to recognize it and redirect it so that you, in essence, rebuild the way it fires when that happens, right?
Mhm.
Get out of that. It's a pattern interrupt. We have a way of responding, and sometimes those just patterned ways of responding are not helpful or useful. And so we have to learn how to navigate that and redirect so that that becomes our new way of being. Does that make sense? And so
Right.
let's
Catch
just say,
it before it makes damage. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So as you start to recognize, one is recognizing that it happens, two is understanding how you can mechanically, physically, and mentally stop that. So I teach four things just to tourniquet it off. The things that we go over in the program, I call them the four unstucks. And so the first thing I teach them how to do is how to tactically start breathing when it presents itself. So tactical breathing is breathing in for 3 seconds, holding it for 3 seconds, and breathing out for 3 seconds. And what that does is it just allows emotions to slow down, and it helps slow down the negative hormones that are getting released into the body that really take you out. Okay, so it's just tactical breathing. Okay, the second thing that I have them do is to change their body temperature. Well, you're like, well, how do I do that? Well, if it's cool inside, go outside where it's warm. If it's warm inside, go outside where it's cool. I've had clients that have gone outside in the wintertime and put their feet in snow.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. Because what happens is it actually redirects those negative emotions, and it gives it's called divided attention tasking. Okay, so now your body has to process the temperature and exactly what you're doing. So now you're not in that emotional spike.
Right.
Makes sense. And so now it has something else it has to consider. One thing that is also really good is, those decanters that they have that keep water ice cold for like 12
Yes.
or 72 hours. I highly recommend having that available and just drinking ice cold water and getting that injection of cold water into the body. I actually used this with my daughter as she was growing up. Kids don't know how to necessarily handle all those emotions. I'd have her sit down, we breathe, she'd drink that ice cold water, give her a few
Ice
minutes,
it
give her a
down.
little bit
Yep.
of love, send her on her way. Same thing with adults. Okay, we're just nurturing the same thing. So that's the second thing, is to change your body temperature. The third thing is to change your body position. So when you immediately recognize that negative emotion, if you are sitting, stand up. If you're standing, sit down. Okay. It redirects those negative emotions, but now it's divided attention tasking, because you have to use balance, you have to use muscles, you have to use coordination. So it actually gets you to work on the thing that's defeating you by using that divided attention tasking. Okay.
Right.
And then the last thing, now this one, will look a little different if you're in a workplace, but I have had clients that used it, but I'll just tell you, I have them use what's called the warrior pose. So do you remember maybe like old school days Wonder Woman or Xena Warrior Princess that used to go
Oh,
into
yeah.
warrior poses, or even Rocky when he would run up those steps and he'd get to the top and he had both hands up and they were just up there and he was
Yep.
making this. Okay, well, those are warrior poses. And I tell them, get into your warrior pose and hold that pose, meaning flexing all those muscles for 2 minutes. So if you sat there and you went into the Xenia warrior pose, which is one arm straight out and the other one in a fist, and you just clenched for 2 minutes straight, it's not as easy as it looks. Like, I'm talking really, really clenching and doing it for 2 minutes straight. Once you get into that pose and start that clenching, what happens is it injects a 25% testosterone boost into your system. And that testosterone is our achievement hormone. So it's not only redirecting that negative emotion that you initially started to feel, but it actually allows for that winning mindset.
Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. Wow.
I know.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, so these are the kind of things that I teach, and that's just to stop the emotional cycling from that threat, that perceived threat, not necessarily physical in nature, but it can be. But you've got to navigate that emotional response, and we need to make sure that it's emotionally intelligent. We need to make sure it's commensurate with what's actually happening, and it's not defeating you, more importantly, or anybody else. And so we
Right.
have to learn how to regulate our emotions. And so that's just one example of, the four unstucks that we use, because once we learn to repattern that immediate negative response, well, now we're just entirely responding differently. Now, now you don't get all amped up. Now you're able to respond accordingly, and everything is much more regulated.
I can imagine coming through that and just being a lot calmer.
Totally.
You've cooled down, you've got more manageable energy because of the
Mhm.
testosterone, and you can
Yeah.
think your way through that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I literally just had 4 clients go through my 90-day program this past 90 days. And literally within the first 2 weeks are like, this has solved what years of therapy could never solve.
Yeah.
You can't talk your way, therapy is really great, but you can't talk your way out of learning the skills behind how to emotionally
Right.
regulate.
Right.
And so it's a very positive experience. And that's just a glimpse of the internal pieces that we don't learn either.
Mm-hmm.
We learn them in other capacities. I learned a great deal in my 18 and a half years in law enforcement. And so what I really did was took a blend of all of the things that really solidified me, that helped me walk through the most traumatic experiences I've ever had. So nobody has to walk through it, because you don't. Or if you do, and it's defeating you in any way, there's resolve. And this is
Mm-hmm.
just different. It's just different than what anybody is used to. And so I'm so happy you asked that question. I love
Yeah,
talking.
well, I was fascinated by that, by that note on your website.
Yeah.
So where do you go from here, Gloria? What comes next?
What comes next? The next pieces are really continuing to connect and creating really strong collaborations and networks. Our base is to teach women that are proactive and want to be proactive in their personal safety, or they want to come and help train other women and young girls.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece of that is companies and organizations that want to align with the 1 Million Women Movement mission and have us come in and either train their employees or want to sponsor. And so in those two arenas, that's really the next steps, is focusing on how to create more of those collaborations. Like we've just had an explosion of growth. And so, I hold 4 trainer sessions a year where I'm bringing women on and they're learning my curriculum and going back into their community, and they're able to earn a living from it. And because that was me way back in the day, being a
That's
single
great.
mom, doing my law enforcement job and trying to figure out, how to pay the bills, how to raise a kid. And so I had my self-defense as my side business. So it kept my skills up, and it helped the community. And so we all rose together, if you will. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's one avenue. And then just the really strong collaborations that we have with the organizations that Soul Punch is working with now today, especially with the YWCA, and just growing that, because it reverberates. The more we reach and the more that we do and the more that we collaborate with the organizations and women and the individuals that are really interested in empowering women to help them command their power and safety, and to help them grow that safety within their communities and their families. That's what we're focusing on. And then I'm going to also be focusing on the online element, so that even if you can't immediately come to me in a physical class, you're going to be able to learn online.
Right.
Uh, I have my whole curriculum professionally recorded in a video series, and I'm getting ready to put that together to offer it, because initially I made it for young girls that were getting ready to go to college. I wanted them to have the ability to be able to know how to protect themselves before they got to college, which is where they're most susceptible to walking through and
Right.
experiencing something negative, 1 in 4. So I put together this video curriculum that they could actually study with their families at home, and then that they could actually go to school with the Defense Alert device, which is a device I support, that they can bring with them to college, that would notify their parents if they ever needed to utilize it for any scenario that they walk through. And so that's the next step, is to get that out in larger fashion, because then I can reach more faster, if that makes
Right.
sense. Yeah.
Right. That's great. That's great. I am so glad that you and the YW in Hanover got connected. I don't
Yeah.
know how that happened, but I'm grateful that connection was made, and
Yeah.
I do hope that collaboration continues for a long, long time. So,
Absolutely. It will continue, and it will continue to grow, and our aligned missions are really gonna start serving in large capacity ways, and we'll start seeing it here before the end of the year. I just know we will.
yes.
It's
Yeah.
already happening. It's
Oh,
already, it
absolutely.
reverberates so much. That training that we did in January, that was over 100 women. I mean, it was just, it's powerful every single time. And so I look forward to it every single time.
Yeah, and I know you've got another one coming up this coming week. And if I understood right, you're coming back in October, you said?
October, yes, October
Yes,
is going to be so strong. So yeah.
yes, that'll be great. That'll be great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. Gloria has such a way of making you feel more powerful just by listening to her. If you would like to learn more about Soul Punch Power Academy and Gloria's training options, visit her website at www.onemillionwomen.info/Soul Punch Power Academy. That's the number 1millionwomen.info/soul-punch-power-academy. You'll be glad you did. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. Stop by again when you have a chance to listen and learn with another enlightened conversation. Just check the YWCA Hanover website and social media for new release dates and topics. If you have topics you would like to learn about, please email me, Lisa Smith, at lsmith@ywcahanover.org. And as always, keep learning.